Welcome back to the County Seat. Our topic today is centrally assessed taxes, and we are going to explore where we might go from here to help the taxpayers who are centrally assessed and the county, the county treasurers in the counties, individual counties, find a process that takes out a lot of the problems that have been developed. Joining us for discussion is Larry Walters, who is a professor at the George Romney Institute of Public Management at Brigham Young University. And also we have Mark Altom, who is the Davis County Treasurer. Thank you both for joining us.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So, Mark, I want to start with you. You had mentioned previous to this discussion going on right now that actually a solution had been tried before and in a bill that was passed. Would you explain that a little bit to us?
Sure. It's interesting that back in 1997, State Senator Howard Stevenson from down in Utah County proposed legislation. It was Senate Bill number 2002, as a matter of fact. And what that bill did was take a tax bill from a centrally assessed taxpayer, and the taxpayer themselves would determine an undisputed portion of that tax. Best way to explain it would maybe be give an example that if the taxpayer had $1 million tax liability and they were going to dispute half of their value, that would mean that they would not dispute $500,000 of that tax liability. But then the county treasurers would distribute to all the taxing entities that $500,000, but the difference that is a disputed amount of the $500,000 would have been held in escrow by the county treasurers, and we would earn interest on that. And then once the issue was resolved, then that amount that is in escrow of that $500,000 would be distributed or would be refunded based on the finalized value to the taxpayer, or part of it, if it was a higher value than the $500,000 would have generated, that would be distributed to the other taxing entities in the county, and then that would be put in revenue, and then that would adjust the rate so that that amount that was brought in from that escrowed amount would not be a windfall to the counties. And we felt like that was certainly a good solution.
In quick summary, that was repealed the following summer.
Well, actually, yes, exactly that summer in July of 1997, the legislature chose in their special session to repeal that bill.
Okay, so that would have solved the problem of counties having to refund, but it still doesn't really address the issue of the cost of going through the appeals process, and that's still on the table. Is speed in getting this done part of the mix, in your opinion, Larry?
It is part of the problem because with these large, complex cases, it takes a lot of time to develop the documentation on the part of the taxpayer to file the appeal, and then there's the amount of the workload for the tax commission and the courts and trying to get cases scheduled and all the witnesses together. So it does take a fair amount of time. The other issue, though, is just the number of appeals that get filed. If we could somehow reduce the number of appeals so that there was more agreement between the tax commission and the taxpayer on what the values were, then that would go a long way toward both reducing the cost for the state and the counties and for the taxpayers, and make the system, I think, a lot more efficient.
Now, it seems to me, and I may not be correct on this, but it seems to me that there are fewer appeals taking place on locally assessed taxes than there are on the centrally assessed taxes. And is part of that the mechanism of how the state is assessing taxes from the tax commission, as opposed to how the county assessors are doing that?
Part of it is the techniques. There are three basic approaches that are used by appraisers everywhere to appraise all property, essentially. And what the county assessor is using generally what's known as a comparable sales approach, where they find similar homes and value your home based upon what they see the market is doing for homes like yours. Mm-hmm. Well, there are just you can't use that kind of an approach very effectively with these large taxpayers with assets spread across a number of states, because there just isn't a market. I mean, those companies aren't traded very much. So then you have to use one of the other techniques that appraisers use. Generally, it's the income approach. They look at the income that the company generates and argue, well, if somebody were to buy that income stream, what would they be willing to pay for it? And they value it on that basis. But all of the techniques that we have for doing that capture value which by the Constitution should not be in the property tax. And so you have to come up then with the judgment process of how do you back out the non-taxable, and that's where the controversy's in, and that's where the litigation comes in. If we change the techniques so that we were just looking at the tangible property that companies have and didn't capture some of that intangible value, there would be many fewer appeals, and this problem would largely go away.
Basically, public utilities need to trade more often so that they can get a comparable value.
But even if they trade, I mean, your story brought out the case of Rocky Mountain Power, which did trade at substantially more than what their assessed value was. And the reason for that is that the people who bought Rocky Mountain Power were looking to the future. They were buying a lot of things that it's not supposed to be in the property tax base.
The intangibles. Right.
Yeah.
Much more complicated, obviously, for the centrally assessed assessment process than locally assessed.
Right. Now, the ratio of centrally assessed taxes and local taxes are changing. And do you see that as a fault of the state tax commission, or do you think that those kinds of assets are really depleting? We have a couple of minutes to answer that.
It's just quickly up to public debate and what is best public policy. Back in the 80s, the total liability was approximately 20%. In about 1999, it was closer to, I believe it was 8%, and now in 2009, it was about 5%. So that's reducing. There could be justification for that, but that's something that could be debated.
Everybody else's values on the residential side seem to be going up with local businesses, and these large companies seem to be going down then.
In fairness, it's possible that the commercial and the locally assessed may be growing faster and centrally assessed are less of a percent of total.
In a 30-second answer, the one magic bullet that would improve this, what would it be?
Change the way we assess the property. Use the cost of the assets, not the income they produce.
And what are your thoughts on that?
I would support that idea, as well as considering the legislation that passed in 1997 may be also a solution.
That certainly would help that rebate issue in great summation. You had pointed out that there was significant revenue change in Millard County over the period of the last few years. Before we go to the break, do you have those figures?
I do have those figures if you're interested. Back in 1999, the centrally assessed properties countywide decreased from 1999 to 2009, decreased over 25%, but the other locally assessed went up by 120%. That's just the numbers. There may be justification, but at the same time, those are the numbers from the State Tax Commission.
It does make things look a little bit suspect. We will come back with a little bit more information on this topic. We'll have our closing thoughts in just a couple of minutes here on the County Seat. Stay with us, and you can always check us out online at thecountyseat.tv.
I think renewable energy and wind farms is a good way to go. We have a lot of land here to do that with, and the opportunity will grow as time goes on.
If a person wants to work in Beaver County right now, they can find a job.
I can't think of a better legacy that I could have left for my town.
Native Americans called it the land of the sleeping rainbow. It's a place of unparalleled enchantment, where history, splendor, and industry meet. We call it Sevier County. Experience the Paiute Trail by ATV, Explore 7 national parks, all within a few hours' drive. Gaze down at the world from an entirely new perspective. Join us in Sevier County and discover real Utah. Come, explore the Paiute Trail and beyond.
St. George, Utah was recently named TripAdvisor's #1 travel hotspot. And travelers picked Zion National Park as the best national park. If you haven't planned your St. George or Zion getaway yet, visit atozion.com and find out why everyone else is already packing.
Won't you come and play with me?
St. George, Utah. Everything from A to Zion.